November 26, 1943. Skies over Bremen, Germany. The pencil trembled in Major Francis Gabby Gabreski's gloved hand as he touched down and began recording the moment in his logbook. 8 months earlier, no one, not the RAF, not the Luftwaffe, not even many American pilots, would have believed what had just happened in the frozen skies over Europe. Through the frost-rimmed canopy at 28,000 feet, Gabreski had witnessed something that violated every so-called known truth of aerial combat. Instead of turning tightly to meet their opponents, instead of dogfighting in the horizontal plane like World War I aces, his squadron had done the unthinkable. They rolled inverted and plunged straight down. A controlled freefall, nearly vertical, approaching speeds no German fighter could dream of surviving. From 500 miles per hour and beyond, the P-47 Thunderbolt became something elemental, something terrifying, something that appeared to the enemy like a streak of sunlight turned into a bolt of steel. Below them, a formation of Messerschmitt Bf-110s was climbing confidently toward the B-17 flying fortresses, unaware of the death forming directly above their cockpit canopies. One moment they were hunters, the next they were prey, caught in the concentrated fire of 8 Browning 50 caliber machine guns. The skies over Bremen witnessed something that cold morning, a shift in the mathematics of air superiority. Not turning radius, not rate of climb, not knife-edge maneuvering, but physics, the brutal, unforgiving physics of a 4-ton fighter converting potential energy into pure kinetic violence. That day, Gabreski destroyed 2 Bf-110s with these tactics and earned the Distinguished Service Cross for protecting the bomber stream. Yet the real story began months earlier on the airfields of England and the test sites of the United States.
The Birth of a Doctrine. April 13, 1943. The 56th Fighter Group's first combat mission, a fighter sweep over Saint-Omer, France, was filled with nerves and doubt. Many pilots had spent 8 months training in the P-47, but few trusted it. The aircraft was enormous, the heaviest single-engine fighter of the war. It outweighed the Spitfire by nearly 4,000 pounds, and even the rugged FW-190 by around 3,000. British pilots openly mocked it. Journalists called it a milk bottle. Others reduced the name to a single word: the Jug. Even inside the group, young pilots like Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson privately feared they'd die in their first week. Their diaries, letters, and Johnson's later memoir, Thunderbolt, reveal a unit struggling to believe in its own aircraft. But hidden beneath its bulky frame was a secret, a radically different concept of air combat waiting to be discovered.
The only way to guarantee interaction with the German fighters was to dive first and further the birth of a doctrine. The P-47 Thunderbolt was built around the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, an 18-cylinder radial engine capable of 2,000 horsepower and far more with water injection. But its real edge came from something sitting behind the pilot, a complex General Electric turbo-supercharger system that no other fighter possessed. Exhaust gases traveled through ducts running along both sides of the cockpit toward a turbine spinning at more than 21,000 RPM. It compressed thin, high-altitude air back to sea-level density and fed it to the engine, letting the Thunderbolt produce full power at altitudes where German engines suffocated. At 30,000 feet, where a Bf-109 wheezed for oxygen, the P-47 grew hungrier, stronger, faster. This massive engine, plus armor plating, self-sealing tanks, and 8 heavy machine guns created a fighter many believed was simply too heavy to dogfight. But the aircraft wasn't built to dogfight. It was built to exploit gravity itself, the dive that terrified test pilots and saved lives later. Months before the 56th ever saw combat, 2 test pilots, Lieutenant Harold Comstock and Lieutenant Roger Dyer, performed a high-altitude dive in November 1942 that nearly killed them. At 35,000 feet, they pushed their P-47Cs downward. The airspeed indicator soared past 500 miles per hour, then 600 miles per hour, toward the edge of its mechanical limit. They encountered violent compressibility. Controls froze. Stick movements did nothing. Man and machine plummeted toward the ground in a screaming dive that no manual had prepared them for. Yet both recovered, barely, and lived to report the phenomenon. Their experience became doctrine. Every P-47 pilot thereafter learned, never touch the trim during compressibility. Use both hands on the stick. Hold pressure, don't panic, until denser air restores control. These lessons later saved countless lives in combat. More importantly, engineers discovered the thick P-47 wing delayed critical compressibility longer than German fighters, meaning the P-47 could safely dive faster than anything the Luftwaffe had. A new tactic was born.
The Colonel who saw the future. Colonel Hubert Hub Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group, recognized the opportunity. Rather than fight German fighters where they were strongest, low to medium altitude turning engagements, he reshaped the entire doctrine around what the P-47 could do. His orders were simple: climb high, always take the fight above 25,000 feet, stay disciplined, no chasing the enemy downward, attack only from above with maximum speed, strike hard, climb away, repeat. The idea was radical. It contradicted decades of fighter tradition, but Zemke knew altitude is life, speed is survival, discipline is victory. And in June 1943, the first real tests proved him right.
First blood. June 12, 1943, the Belgian coast. Captain Walter Cook of the 61st Fighter Squadron looked down from altitude and saw it, a lone Focke-Wulf FW-190, unaware and perfectly exposed. Cook rolled inverted, pressed the nose down, and followed Zemke's doctrine precisely. No turning, no hesitation, just a clean, unbroken dive at maximum throttle. At over 450 miles per hour, he fired a single burst. The FW-190 tumbled into the sea. It was the 56th Fighter Group's first official kill, and it came exactly the way Zemke predicted. The next day, June 13th, the tactic proved itself again and again. 3 more German fighters fell to the 56th. Among them was one destroyed by 22-year-old Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, his first victory. He dove from altitude, fired a disciplined burst, and pulled back into a zoom climb, regaining his perch above the battle. But success came with a lesson. In his excitement, Johnson broke formation. His element leader failed to cover him. Seconds later, Johnson found himself isolated, multiple German fighters closing in. He survived narrowly. When he returned, he expected congratulations. Instead, he was reprimanded by Captain Gerald Johnson, by Frank Gabreski, and by Zemke himself. The message was clear. The tactic works only if the formation stays disciplined. Victory means nothing if you don't make it home. Zemke was forging not just a fighter unit, but a doctrine that demanded precision, teamwork, and absolute obedience to physics.
June 26, 1943, the day the jug showed its soul. If June 12th and 13th proved the offensive power of the P-47, June 26th proved its defensive miracle. During escort duty near Forges-les-Eaux, France, the 56th was bounced by 16 FW-190s. In the chaos, Lieutenant Johnson's P-47C, nicknamed Half Pint, was hit almost immediately. What followed became one of the most famous survival stories in aviation history. Cannon shells shattered his canopy, hydraulic fluid sprayed across the cockpit, fire licked the floor, shrapnel struck Johnson's face, the cockpit filled with smoke. He tried to bail out, the canopy jammed, he was trapped. With no choice, Johnson shoved the nose forward and dove for the English Channel.
But one FW-190 stuck to him, relentlessly, pouring 20mm shells into the almost dead Thunderbolt. Dozens of rounds tore through the wings, fuselage, tail, engine cowling. Johnson's airplane should have come apart in midair. Finally, the German pilot ran out of ammunition. He pulled alongside, looked directly at Johnson through the shattered glass, and saluted. It was over. But miraculously, the colossal R-2800 engine was still running. The Jug's armor, structure, and redundant systems had held. Johnson coaxed the crippled airplane across the channel and landed safely at RAF Manston. Ground crews counted over 200 holes without even walking around the entire airplane. Yet P-47 Half-Pint was eventually repaired and returned to combat. That day, every pilot in the 8th Air Force learned a truth. If you're hit, you want to be hit in a Thunderbolt.
August 17, 1943, Schweinfurt-Regensburg, the first large-scale vertical battle. On August 17, 1943, the 8th Air Force launched its most daring mission yet, a deep penetration strike against ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt and aircraft plant at Regensburg. 376 B-17s took to the air. The Luftwaffe scrambled everything it could. For the first phase, the P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group had the crucial job of escorting the Regensburg formation as deep as fuel allowed. Zemke positioned his fighters 5,000 feet above the bombers, a perfect setup for vertical attack. German fighters, Bf-109s and FW-190s, took off from bases across France and Belgium, timing their climb to intercept the bombers when the P-47s would be low on fuel. But they miscalculated. Zemke was waiting. High, fast, ready. The moment the German fighters climbed into view, dozens of Thunderbolts rolled inverted and dove, 45 degrees, 60 degrees, some nearly vertical, at speeds approaching 480 miles per hour. What happened next was a slaughter. The 56th Fighter Group claimed 16 German fighters destroyed, 1 probable, and 9 damaged. German records confirm 22 Luftwaffe aircraft lost that day, including Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, brother of the legendary Adolf Galland. He never saw the P-47 that killed him. Captain Walker Bud Mahoran dove at nearly 500 miles per hour and fired a precise burst that tore Galland aircraft apart. By the end of the engagement, the Luftwaffe learned a new fear, the vertical strike of the Thunderbolt. And American strategists learned something even more important. Bomber losses dropped dramatically whenever P-47 escorts were overhead.
October 1943. The 56th becomes a legend. By October, the 56th Fighter Group had matured into a deadly, fully synchronized machine. Missions over Frankfurt, Bremen, and Münster showcased stunning kill ratios. October 4th, Cologne region. The 56th intercepted a mixed force of German fighters. Using textbook boom and zoom, they destroyed around 15 twin-engine Bf-110s, aircraft typically used to attack bombers. They lost only 2 Thunderbolts, both to flak, not fighters. October 8th, Bremen. Robert Johnson, now a rising star, executed a perfect dive attack, destroying an FW-190 at over 460 miles per hour. He was back at altitude within 60 seconds. October 10th, Münster. Johnson becomes an ace. This day sealed Johnson's legacy. He scored 3 kills in 25 minutes, including a Bf-110, an FW-190, and a highly experienced Bf-109 pilot. One of those kills, unknown at the time, was Oberlieutenant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's greatest aces with 206 victories. Johnson ended the mission with his aircraft once again filled with holes, hydraulic systems destroyed, and smoke trailing behind him. Yet he made it home, because the P-47 could take damage no other fighter in the war could endure. By November 1943, a new truth dominated the skies. Do not fight the Thunderbolt above 25,000 feet. German pilots said it, American bomber crews repeated it. the 56th Fighter Group proved it. The physics behind a kill ratio approaching 20-1. The P-47's success was not magic, it was engineering and discipline. At 30,000 feet, a fully loaded P-47 had 9.44 million foot-pounds of potential energy. A German fighter trying to climb from 20,000 to 30,000 feet would need 4 to 6 minutes. Massive fuel, steadily declining engine power. A P-47 diving from 30,000 to 20,000 feet converted that stored altitude into speeds approaching or exceeding 500 miles per hour. No German aircraft could safely match that speed, structurally or aerodynamically. And after firing, the P-47 used its accumulated energy to zoom back to near its starting altitude in 40 to 60 seconds. Meanwhile, the German fighter needed minutes to recover its lost altitude. That mismatch created the kill ratios recorded by the 56th Fighter Group. 11-1 in air-to-air combat, 5-1 including all mechanical and non-combat losses, 15-20-1 when pilots strictly followed vertical tactics. It wasn't mythology, it was science.
Winter 1943. The hardest sky in the world. By late 1943, the strategic bombing campaign over Germany intensified. Thunderstorms, snow squalls, freezing winds. The winter sky over Europe became a battlefield as dangerous as the Luftwaffe. And yet the 56th Fighter Group kept flying. Their tactics were now refined, their discipline absolute, their confidence unshakable. But the Luftwaffe, despite mounting losses, wasn't finished. Germany surged everything it had, veterans, rookies, emergency-trained replacements, trying to crush the bomber streams that were tearing apart its industrial core. What followed were some of the most intense aerial battles of the war. January 11, 1944, the mission to Österleben. On January 11, 1944, the 56th escorted bombers attacking Österleben deep in central Germany. More than 100 German fighters tried to overwhelm the bomber formation. Major Gabreski led from 29,000 feet. For nearly an hour, the sky became a sprawling three-dimensional war, one of the longest continuous engagements the 56th ever fought. Thunderbolts dove again and again, climbing back through tracer fire, weaving above the bomber boxes, engaging everywhere the Luftwaffe appeared. Gabreski executed 6 vertical attacks in a single mission, destroying 3 aircraft and damaging 2 more. His combat report described it as the most exhausting fight of his life. When the guns finally fell silent, the 56th claimed, 22 German fighters destroyed, for the loss of only 4 P-47s. Most importantly, bomber losses during the period of P-47 escort were dramatically lower than expected. The message was clear. When the Thunderbolts were overhead, the bombers survived. This was the real metric of victory. Not aces, not kill totals, but the survival of the bomber crews whose missions bled Germany's war machine dry. February 1944. Operation Argument. Big week. Then came the turning point. February 20th through 25th, 1944. Big week. 6 days of relentless American air assaults against German aircraft factories, engine plants, and production hubs. Over 3,000 heavy bomber sorties were launched. The Luftwaffe threw everything it had left into the sky. And the Thunderbolts of the 56th Fighter Group were in the center of the storm. They flew 16 major missions in 6 days, logging more combat hours than any other fighter group. By now, their pilots were veterans, with hundreds of hours in the jug, facing German pilots whose experience levels were rapidly collapsing. The results showed the imbalance. February 20th, Leipzig. 15 German fighters destroyed. February 22nd, Halberstadt, 12 destroyed. February 24 through 25th, dozens more. Across Big Week and early March, the 56th downed approximately 87 enemy aircraft. The Luftwaffe never recovered. Not from the losses, not from the collapse in pilot experience, not from the psychological shock of facing high-altitude diving attacks they couldn't counter. Big Week wasn't just a series of missions. It was the moment Germany lost daylight air superiority. The collapse of Luftwaffe experience. Before Big Week, German fighter pilots had arrived at the front with 200 to 400 hours of flight training, often combat experience from the Eastern Front, confidence and tactical mastery. After Big Week, some arrived with as little as 50 hours total flight time, many of those in trainers, not frontline fighters. Meanwhile, American pilots entering the 56th averaged 150 to 200 hours of flight training, plus additional fighter transition, plus disciplined tactical instruction from Zemke's doctrine. The experience gap became brutal. Inexperienced German pilots failed to check high altitudes for diving attackers, misjudged vertical range, panicked and dove away reflexively, bled airspeed in turns, broke formation cohesion under pressure, and the Thunderbolt punished every mistake. A German survivor later said, "You did not see the P-47 until it was too late. It fell from the sun like a hammer. If you lived long enough to look up again, it was already climbing away." By spring 1944, even elite German units began avoiding high-altitude engagements altogether. The vertical was now American territory.
March 6, 1944. Escort to Berlin. March 6, 1944, marked the first full-scale U.S. daylight bomber raid on Berlin. The 56th Fighter Group flew escort, and something astonishing happened. Not a single German fighter dared engage them at high altitude. The Luftwaffe attacked the bombers but avoided the Thunderbolts. They had learned, painfully, that diving into the Jug's engagement envelope was close to suicidal. The 56th completed escort to Berlin itself, the heart of enemy airspace, without a significant high-altitude fight. The Germans weren't losing nerve, they were losing mathematics. They could not contest the vertical fight anymore. Spring 1944. Thunderbolt becomes a destroyer of the ground, too. With the air war largely won at high altitude, Thunderbolt squadrons shifted increasingly to fighter-bomber operations. 500-pound bombs, 1,000-pound bombs, high-velocity aircraft rockets, or HVARs. And once again, the vertical profile made the aircraft deadly. A typical P-47 ground attack strike looked like this. Orbit at 25,000 plus feet. Locate trains, convoys, airfields. Roll into a 60-degree plus dive. Release bombs from 4,000 to 6,000 feet. Pull out with enough speed to outrun light and medium flak. Few aircraft could deliver such precision from a high-speed vertical dive and survive the punishment on pullout. The same physics that made the P-47 unstoppable in air-to-air combat now gave it the ability to devastate ground targets.
July 5, 1944. Gebreski's final victory. Colonel Francis Gabby Gebreski, already the highest-scoring American ace in the European theater, claimed his final victory on July 5, 1944. 28 confirmed kills, all in P-47s, all using boom and zoom tactics. 2 weeks later, his luck finally ran out. On July 20th, while strafing Bassenheim airfield at low altitude, his propeller struck the ground. The P-47 crashed in German territory. Gebreski was captured and spent 9 months as a POW. After the war, when asked about his success, he always answered the same way. It wasn't one pilot. It wasn't one airplane.
It was the doctrine. Once we learned the vertical fight, we were unstoppable. Zemke's legacy, a doctrine that outlived the war. Colonel Hubert Zemke, the architect of the 56th Fighter Group's tactics, later wrote, "Everyone said the P-47 was too heavy, too clumsy, too slow to survive. They said we would be slaughtered. They were wrong. We found its strength, the dive, and played that note endlessly." Zemke discovered what others missed. Altitude equals stored energy. Mass equals momentum. Thick wings equal delayed compressibility. Turbocharging equals superior high-altitude power. Rugged frame equals survive hits others couldn't. From those traits, he built a vertical doctrine that spread across the entire 8th Air Force. And it worked. Spectacularly.
Summer 1944, shattering the Luftwaffe's resolve. By mid-1944, the combined effect of American fighter doctrine, technology, training, and overwhelming industrial support had pushed the Luftwaffe into a nosedive it could not recover from. The P-47 Thunderbolt played a central role in this collapse, not just as a fighter, but increasingly as a ground attack weapon striking the arteries of Germany's war machine. The Luftwaffe was still dangerous, its aircraft were still excellent, but something far more critical had been lost: experienced pilots. The killing ground of early 1944. Between January and March, during the height of Big Week and its aftermath, German fighter squadrons hemorrhaged veteran pilots, men with hundreds of missions and irreplaceable tactical knowledge. American intelligence noticed a rapid shift. Before 1943, Luftwaffe pilots averaged 300-plus combat hours. By early 1944, new German pilots arrived at the front with less than 50 hours and often no training in high-altitude combat. Many had never fired their guns in the air before facing Thunderbolts and Mustangs. The P-47's boom and zoom style was unforgiving toward inexperience. New German pilots, lacking situational awareness and discipline, were easy prey for the 56th. Conversely, American pilots entering European combat had 175 to 225 hours of training, extensive formation practice, standardized tactics, and a doctrine designed around aircraft strengths, plus the advantage of fighting over friendly territory. And the P-47 itself was built with robustness and survivability unmatched by German designs. This gap in training and survivability ensured that the Luftwaffe's decline was not linear, it was catastrophic.
March 1944, the sky over Berlin. March 6, 1944. For the first time, the 8th Air Force sent its heavy bombers to Berlin in daylight. The Luftwaffe had promised Germany that Berlin, the Reich's heart, would never be touched by daytime bombs as long as German fighters could fly. Yet, when the 56th Fighter Group escorted B-17s into the Berlin region for the first time, not a single Luftwaffe unit dared challenge them at high altitude. This moment, quiet, almost anticlimactic, proved how thoroughly Allied fighter doctrine had changed the strategic balance. For a year, German pilots had complained about one thing: do not fight the Americans above 25,000 feet. Now, as the Thunderbolts crossed Berlin, the Luftwaffe simply refused to engage. The once feared German air defense system, ace-driven, aggressive, confident, had fractured. Germany's skies no longer belonged to Germany. The Thunderbolt becomes a ground attack monster. By spring 1944, with high-altitude air superiority largely secured by the P-47 and P-51, the Thunderbolt shifted toward a new mission: destroying the German army and its supply arteries. Loaded with 500-pound bombs, 1,000-pound bombs, 4 or 6 high-velocity aircraft rockets, HVAR, and wing-mounted 50-caliber guns. The P-47 transformed into a war machine capable of shredding rail lines, tank columns, artillery positions, convoys, and anything that moved. Its thick armor, massive radial engine, and rugged airframe made it the ideal low-altitude brawler. Unlike liquid-cooled German fighters, the radial engine could take hits and keep running, just as Johnson's half-pint had proven the year before. Ground troops came to rely on the sound of 850s above them. The thunderous roar of a diving jug became synonymous with salvation for Allied soldiers and destruction for the enemy. Gabreski's final victory, July 5, 1944. On July 5, 1944, Francis "Gabby" Gabreski scored his 28th aerial victory, making him the leading American ace in the European theater. Every single one of those victories, every kill, every success, every victory over a German aircraft had been accomplished in the P-47 Thunderbolt. He had mastered Zemke's doctrine: stay high, hit fast, don't turn fight, don't linger, strike with overwhelming energy, then vanish back into the sun. He was the embodiment of the Thunderbolt. But fate intervened. July 20th, 1944. A single mistake. 15 days after his final kill, Gabreski made a rare misjudgment while strafing the Bossenheim airfield. His propeller struck the ground at low altitude, just inches. The aircraft shuddered violently. He crash-landed in German-held territory and was captured. Gabreski spent the last 9 months of the war as a POW. His combat career in Europe was over. His legend was not. He would later fly again in Korea, this time in the F-86 Sabre, using the very same principles learned in the P-47 to down 6.5 MiG-15s. The Thunderbolt's impact on the strategic bombing campaign. Even with the emergence of the longer-ranged P-51 Mustang, the Thunderbolt's role in winning air superiority cannot be overstated. The Thunderbolt escorted bombers through the most dangerous phases of missions, broke the back of the Luftwaffe's veteran pilot corps, provided the numbers, firepower, and survivability needed, proved vertical tactics worked, dominated high-altitude combat, and then shifted to ground attack at a scale unmatched by any other fighter. The bomber's offensive success, crippling Germany's oil, transportation, and aircraft production, depended critically on Allied fighters. And in 1943-44, no fighter in the world matched the P-47 Thunderbolt's combination of altitude performance, diving speed, ruggedness, firepower, and repeated vertical attack capability. The skies over Europe were not won by turning duels, but by physics. And the P-47 was the master of that physics. Winter 1943 to 1944. The fight intensifies. As autumn bled into winter, the air war over Europe reached a boiling point. The Luftwaffe, battered but not broken, launched larger and more desperate intercept missions. The 8th Air Force continued its relentless bombing campaign, striking deeper into the German homeland. And through it all, the P-47 Thunderbolt became the shield that protected the bomber crews. By early winter, the 56th Fighter Group was no longer simply a participant in the air war. It was defining it. Zemke's vertical tactics had matured into a doctrine. His pilots had transformed into experts in energy management, and Gabreski, Johnson, Majorin, Schilling, and others had become names the Luftwaffe feared. January 11, 1944, Oschersleben, one of the hardest battles yet. On January 11th, the 8th Air Force sent a massive bomber force towards central Germany. Weather was brutal. Ice clung to wings, visibility was poor. Yet the mission proceeded because it had to. German aircraft plants needed to be destroyed before they could recover from earlier strikes. The Luftwaffe responded with everything it had. Over 100 enemy fighters rose to challenge the bombers, and the 56th Fighter Group met them at 29,000 feet. Major Gabreski led the attack himself.
Over the next hour, in a chaotic aerial battlefield stretching across nearly 150 miles, the Thunderbolts executed 6 full cycles of vertical boom and zoom attacks. Dive, fire, climb. Dive, fire, climb again. Gabreski personally destroyed 3 German fighters that day, damaging 2 more. The group claimed 22 enemy aircraft destroyed for the loss of just 4 P-47s. The kill ratio was lower than usual, 5.5 to 1, because of the scale and intensity of the fight. Yet what mattered most was this: bomber losses were dramatically reduced whenever the P-47s were overhead. Only 5 B-17s fell during the period of Thunderbolt escort. The doctrine was working exactly as Zemke intended.
February 1944. Operation Argument, Big Week. From February 20th to 25th, the U.S. Army Air Forces launched the most ambitious, relentless strike of the European air campaign. Its objective? Destroy the German aircraft industry in one continuous, overwhelming blow. This was Big Week. For 6 straight days, the 8th and 15th Air Forces hit engine factories, airframe assembly plants, machine tool manufacturers, transportation hubs feeding the Luftwaffe, training and repair depots. Every German fighter squadron capable of flight took to the skies. Every elite pilot still alive was thrown into battle. And the Thunderbolt stood between them and the bomber force. The 56th Fighter Group flew 16 major missions during Big Week. The results were devastating for the Luftwaffe. February 20th, 14 kills. February 21st, 8 kills. February 22nd, the Holly mission, 12 kills. February 24th, multiple engagements, heavy German losses. February 25th, the final blow. In total, the 56th destroyed 87 German aircraft in the Big Week period alone. German industry was crippled. More importantly, it lost pilots, experienced pilots, the one resource Germany could not replace. A pilot could be trained in 6 months. An ace took years, and those years had run out. March 6, 1944, escort to Berlin. On March 6th, the 8th Air Force launched its first massive daylight raid on Berlin itself. The symbolism was staggering. Bomber crews called it the mission no one wanted to fly, but everyone wanted to say they flew. The Luftwaffe scrambled to intercept. German high command expected heavy American losses. But as the bombers crossed the German border, something unreal happened. No German fighters came to meet them. Not one. Because the Luftwaffe had learned, through blood and wreckage, that engaging P-47s above 25,000 feet was suicide. This was the moment historians mark as the beginning of true Allied air superiority. The skies over Germany were changing, and the Thunderbolt had changed them.
Transition to fighter bomber, the Thunderbolt's second identity. By mid-1944, with the Luftwaffe forced lower and lower in both altitude and numbers, the P-47 expanded its mission set. The Jug moved from pure air superiority to devastating ground attack. Its strength in the dive, the very trait that made it unbeatable in aerial combat, made it equally deadly against trains, truck convoys, tank columns, flak towers, troop formations, rail yards. P-47s routinely orbited at 25,000-plus feet, spotted targets below, and executed steep dive bombing runs at 60 degrees or more. Release point, 4,000 to 6,000 feet. Recovery, zoom climb, back to safety. German ground troops began calling the P-47 der Schlachtkopf, the hammerhead, because when a Thunderbolt dove, it hit like a hammer from heaven. Gabreski's rise and fall. Francis S. "Gabby" Gabreski became the top American ace in the European theater with 28 confirmed victories, all achieved in P-47s. By summer 1944, he was a legend, calm in the cockpit, lethal in combat, beloved by younger pilots. But on July 20th, 1944, his luck ran out. During a strafing run on a German airfield near Bassenheim, Gabreski flew too low. His propeller clipped the ground. The engine tore apart. He crash-landed behind enemy lines and was captured. He spent the final 9 months of the war as a prisoner, surviving only by grit, defiance, and will. Even in captivity, his legend grew.
The human toll of vertical combat. Boom and zoom tactics were devastatingly effective, but they were not easy. Pulling out of a 500-mile-per-hour dive often meant 7 to 8 Gs. Pilots suffered tunnel vision, burst capillaries, spinal compression, migraines, lower back injuries, temporary blackouts. And yet, they flew again the next morning, and again the day after that. By 1944, many experienced Thunderbolt pilots looked older than their years. Physically battered men in their early 20s carrying the weight of a war. Spring 1944, the Luftwaffe breaks. By April and May 1944, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. The experienced aces, men who survived the Battle of Britain, the Eastern Front, North Africa, were mostly dead or wounded. Their replacements sometimes arrived with less than 50 hours in type. Meanwhile, American pilots entering combat had 200-plus hours of flight time, standardized doctrine, combat lessons passed down from veterans, aircraft designed around altitude dominance. The skies became brutally one-sided. German pilots described P-47 dive attacks as sudden explosions falling from the sun. You never saw the jug coming. You only saw the tracers as they tore past your canopy. 1944 to 1945 statistical dominance. The 56th Fighter Group's final score was 674.5 confirmed aerial victories, 60 combat losses in air-to-air fighting, kill ratio 11.2 to 1. Including mechanical, weather, and all non-combat losses, 128 total aircraft lost. Overall kill ratio 5.3 to 1. Many individual pilots had extraordinary records. Gabreski, 28 kills, all in P-47s. Robert Johnson, 27 kills. David Schilling, 22.75 kills. Walker Mayhearn, 21 kills with the 56th, all achieved through vertical energy tactics.
Why the P-47 succeeded where others struggled. The P-47 was not a dogfighter. It was something different, something new. Its strengths were unmatched dive speed, unbeatable durability, superior high-altitude engine power, heavy firepower, ability to maintain energy longer than any opponent. Zemke's doctrine turned these strengths into a weapon system. Dive from above. Strike with overwhelming speed. Climb back. Never turn when you can dive. Never fight fair. Always fight with advantage. The Jug was the first American fighter truly designed and used according to the laws of energy and physics rather than the traditions of dogfighting. This doctrine shaped the next generation, the P-51 Mustang, the F-86 Sabre, the F-100 Super Sabre, and every energy fight jet that followed. Even in Korea, Gabreski used the same principles in his F-86 Sabre to shoot down 6.5 MiG-15s. Legacy. How the Thunderbolt changed everything. German pilots interviewed after the war spoke of the P-47 with a mix of fear and respect. One Luftwaffe pilot summarized it best. You could run from a Spitfire. You could outturn a Mustang. But you could not hide from a Thunderbolt falling from the sky. The Thunderbolt flew 746,000 sorties in World War II, achieved a 4.6 to 1 global kill ratio, and proved that physics, discipline, and doctrine, not raw agility, win air superiority. The 56th Fighter Group took an aircraft dismissed as too heavy and used it to protect thousands of bomber crewmen, rewrite aerial tactics, and dominate the skies over Germany. They showed the world that altitude is power, speed is survival, and discipline is destiny. When you roll inverted at 30,000 feet, point the nose at the earth and dive at half the speed of sound, you don't just attack the enemy, you redefine what a fighter can be.
Winter 1943. The Thunderbolt sharpens its blade. The winter skies over Europe brought cold, gray clouds streaked with contrails and fire. As 1943 gave way to 1944, both sides of the air war escalated. Germany fought with desperation. America fought with momentum. The Luftwaffe still had skill, still had aces, still had veterans hardened since 1939. But what they did not have anymore was time. The more the 56th Fighter Group refined its vertical tactics, the more the Luftwaffe felt a creeping inevitability. The Thunderbolt owned the high sky. January 11, 1944 provided the proof. January 11, 1944, the battle for Austerleben. On this bitter winter day, the 8th Air Force launched a massive strike into central Germany against factories feeding the Luftwaffe's already strained production lines. Major Gabreski, now operations officer, led P-47s at 29,000 feet. German fighters rose in waves, Bf-109s and W-190s, desperate to stop the bombers. The engagement stretched nearly an hour over 150 miles of German airspace. It was a rolling, spiraling, vertical war. Thunderbolts diving and climbing in relentless cycles, Germans trying to reach altitude against a foe that refused to fight on their terms. During that single mission, the 56th destroyed 22 German fighters, lost 4 P-47s, 3 to fighters, 1 to mechanical failure, and saved dozens of American bombers. Gabreski himself dove 6 times, scoring 3 kills. His combat report described it as the most intense, sustained aerial engagement of my career. The lesson of that day was clear. The Luftwaffe could no longer dictate the fight. The Thunderbolt dictated everything.
February 1944. Big Week begins. Operation Argument, better known to airmen as Big Week, was a 6-day hammer strike against the heart of the German aviation industry. From February 20th to 25th, 1944, the 8th Air Force launched over 3,000 bomber sorties, and the Luftwaffe responded with everything it had left. For the 56th Fighter Group, this was the moment all their training, all their doctrine, all their sacrifice had been preparing for. 6 days, 16 major missions, relentless combat. And the Thunderbolt proved to be the perfect weapon for the job. February 20th, Leipzig. The 56th escorted bombers into the teeth of German air defenses. The Luftwaffe attacked in masses, veteran pilots leading formations of increasingly inexperienced newcomers. But diving attacks from altitude shattered German cohesion. The 56th destroyed 15 fighters with 0 losses. February 22nd, Gotha and Halberstadt. More German fighters rose, more German fighters fell. The 56th destroyed 12 more. In the span of the week, the 56th Fighter Group alone scored 87 aerial victories. But the statistics hide something deeper, more tragic. Germany was running out of pilots. The Luftwaffe's veteran aces were dying faster than replacements could be trained. New German pilots arrived with poor navigation skills, weak gunnery, almost no formation discipline, and less than 50 hours in type. In contrast, American pilots arrived with 150 to 200 hours, formal training in energy tactics, instructors who had combat experience, and the world's best mechanical support infrastructure. The imbalance grew with every mission. The Thunderbolt had not just become a powerful fighter. It had become a strategy, a methodical machine for destroying the Luftwaffe's capacity to fight. By March 1944, the collapse was visible.
March 6, 1944. Escort to Berlin. The mission American air crews had whispered about for months finally arrived. Berlin, the heart of the Reich, the ultimate test of American fighter escort. The 56th Fighter Group rose into the icy morning with determination boiling beneath cold steel. Hours later, they reached the German capital. And something extraordinary happened. The Luftwaffe refused to engage, not because they lacked courage, but because they lacked altitude, experience, and strength. P-47s patrolled above the bombers like watchful giants, while German fighters lurked too low to attack safely. The once unstoppable Luftwaffe was learning a painful truth. When the Thunderbolt held the high ground, fighting meant dying. Spring 1944. The Jug learns a new role. By early 1944, with air superiority taking shape, Thunderbolts increasingly shifted into a new mission, fighter-bomber. Still carrying their 8.5 cal guns, P-47s now added 500-pound bombs, 1,000-pound bombs, high-velocity aircraft rockets. But even in this new role, they used the same boom and zoom DNA. Orbit high, identify the target, roll in a steep dive, release weapons at 4,000 to 6,000 feet, and zoom climb back to altitude before flak could track them. The Thunderbolt became a flying sledgehammer, hitting rail lines, convoys, depots, factories, and airfields with devastating precision. The aircraft that critics had once mocked as too heavy, too slow, too big was becoming the most feared multi-role fighter on the Western Front.
Gabreski's final victory, July 5, 1944. Francis "Gabby" Gabreski, America's highest-scoring ace in the European theater, achieved his 28th victory on July 5th. All of them in P-47s. All of them using vertical tactics. 15 days later, on July 20th, while strafing Bossenheim airfield at low altitude, Gabreski misjudged his height. His prop struck the ground. He crash-landed behind enemy lines. He spent the final 9 months of the war as a POW. But his legacy lived on. P-47 Thunderbolt, Cinematic Rewrite, Part 6. Legacy. Kill ratios. Why the Thunderbolt dominated the sky. The Thunderbolt's final numbers. From April 1943 to April 1945, the 56th Fighter Group flew 447 combat missions, 674.5 confirmed kills, 60 losses in air-to-air combat, 128 total losses, all causes. This meant 11.2 to 1 air combat kill ratio, 5.3 to 1 overall kill ratio, including weather or mechanical losses. No other 8th Air Force fighter group matched this record, and individual aces proved the doctrine. Gabreski, 28 victories, all in P-47s. Robert S. Johnson, 27 victories, all in P-47s. David Schilling, 22 3/4 victories. Walker Mahurin, 21 victories. Their success was not coincidence, not luck, not better pilots. It was a doctrine built on engineering reality.